Alright, here we go. You don't know me, I don't know you, but I felt the need to make this video for a while. It is time to talk about theories about the 2024 presidential election being stolen. Uh, I'm just gonna dive right into it and we'll see where we go. So, if you've heard this theory, you've seen this graph. This is a graph showing early voting in Clark County, Nevada. According to the organization ETA, what this graph is showing is that at 250 votes, there is a sudden dramatic shift in the variance of, or rather, as you go up on this graph, this data becomes more clumped, and that is a red flag for election interference. Well, I'm here to tell you, my friends, that conclusion, I don't think there's too much going. I don't think their conclusions about Clark County have much weight behind them. So, for starters, let's go into this organization, ETA. Are they a good organization that puts out good information and we can trust them implicitly that they've crossed their T's and dotted their I's and done their work? I don't think so. So here's just a couple of claims I found that they've put out over the past couple months since they've been formed that are pretty wrong or just misleading. So this one is from a lot of these will be from Substack articles that they have published. Actually, all of them on this slide. The next slide has a video one, but this one is detailing a incident on election day in Fayette County, where this man, Vincent Manetta, a judge of elections, uh, told some poll workers that he was going to hand recount, or not hand recount. He was going to hand count. The ballots hadn't been counted yet. The ballots in the precinct that he was a judge of elections for. The election board heard this. They sued him to stop, and he stopped. And when ETA put out their statement about it, they really misrepresented it. You can see here they say the court's formal same-day order on November 5th stated that the sheriff of Fayette County would physically escort anyone attempting to hand count the ballots off the premises. But if you read the order, it doesn't say that the sheriff's going to come in and escort people out and arrest them. It says what the sheriff is supposed to do is take over Vincent Manletta's job of escorting the ballots to a central tabulation facility. He would take a poll worker with him, so the poll worker would have custody of the ballots. But the sheriff was just there to do Vincent's job if Vincent was going to be a bad boy and defy the court order. In addition, this all happened. This court order was filed at 3:30 on election day, or thereabouts. How is it that there are a discrepancy in the returns of any election district before a poll is closed? There isn't. You don't get returns until the poll is closed. So even this weird roundabout way to justify Manetta's actions, and they were very pro Manetta in their video, let me tell you, it doesn't make sense. In addition, they're implying that he's a member of the Board of Elections. He isn't in Fayette County. That's the county commissioners and not judge of elections who are on that board. And, he never requested a hand recount. He just said he was going to do it. And he said it again to the election commissioner. So, yeah, that's not an accurate representation. Then over here, they claim that this ballot was printed instead of the real ballot, and that's why you couldn't cast votes in Cambria County. But you see this big specimen across it. That's because this is a sample ballot. Now, some sample ballots like this will have the time and security marks that they're saying this ballot is missing. But also, plenty of places will just upload the sample ballot without it, so you can't run a sample ballot through the machine. You don't need it for a sample ballot, so why put it on there? So I think that this claim is a little false, and that's important because later in the article they say that they have a picture of this ballot, but with the marks on the side, and they say, oh, that's not what it's supposed to be, but they don't actually have a source saying that it's supposed to look like this. They just guessed that. Here's a fun one. They say here in this part of their article, that a local news station displayed an error. According to a local news station, when this ballot was run through this voting machine, this error was displayed. The local news station doesn't say that. If you read the article they linked, it says nothing about the error you see on the screen. Because this error on the screen is part of B-roll stock footage being shown in that story. There's no claims about how this error was made. and there are plenty of perfectly reasonable explanations for how you can get in onto this screen without that the machine was showing the wrong error because they're trying to push a conspiracy theory that what the official story of Cambria County is wrong, that there were proper time and security marks on the ballot, and it was some kind of hacking thing. At least that's the gist that I'm getting from reading their Substack article. But they can correct me if they're wrong on that. Here's a fun one. They're an organization that is advocating for hand counting ballots, and they're just saying that hand counting ballots is a really simple process where you just read a ballot and record its votes. Yet, no, hand counting ballots has a lot of safeguards in it about making sure the count is right. Most of the safeguards in hand counting ballots are about, making sure the count you have is accurate and complete. It's not just reading a ballot and recording its votes. In fact, there's a county in California who did an experiment with hand counting ballots, and they found that 75 minutes. Sorry, it took their team of poll workers 75 minutes to record the votes on 25 ballots. It's a very time-intensive process, and it's fully believable that duplicating will be faster because you don't have to verify that the count is as accurate because you're not hand counting it. It's the actual counting and verifying that takes time, not reading the ballots. So it's just a weird one. And then here's a fun one. This is a weird one because I see this all the time in the subreddit that ETA formed out of. They will just say that Ronald Reagan won all the swing states in 1984, and they say 7 now because I corrected them that it wasn't all. Minnesota was the swing state that year by any definition you can use, and he didn't win it. But also, there just aren't 7 swing states in 1984. I mean, I want to see what definition of swing state they use because, they change every year. But I haven't seen anyone actually list out what they consider the 7 swing states that Ronald Reagan won was. So it's just a weird one, right? It's a weird one for them to bring up. Then we got a video here. Here we go.
Okay, I will share my screen.
Who you are.
Yeah.
All right, it's around here.
Did occur, what would the actual results have been and the reported amounts actually be? And from that analysis we did, it was looking somewhere along the lines of at least 5 swing states. There's 2 swing states we couldn't do a full analysis in, so we can't really say yet. But at least 5 of those swing states, Harris would have won.
Wow.
And the amount of votes she generally would have had somewhere around the 70% of the popular vote.
Okay. In the entire history of the Democratic Party, no candidate has ever reached 70% of the popular vote. Does Kamala Harris seem like the candidate to break that record? No. I mean, you can ask anyone could have told you that Kamala Harris was going to underperform compared to Joe Biden. That was expected. That was what was going into it. No one would have said Kamala Harris having more votes than FDR, more votes than LBJ, more votes than, I guess those are the 2 big ones, but more votes than Obama. That would be insane. That would be an insane scenario for someone like Kamala Harris to reach. So, and they don't show they're working here to find how they got that number, and it really makes me question what they did to get it because it doesn't sound right.
At least from our estimates.
And how many Republican voters? I heard a number.
They would have had only around maybe at most 30% or less.
Wow.
Exit polling, done by CNN, every major news organization, has that number at 5%. So how did he get 30? That doesn't align with any sort of data we have, and he then doesn't explain how he got it. Oh, no, there's one more on that slide. Oh boy.
Okay, I will share my screen.
You tell me if I have the right statistic. He said the probability that Trump could have won those 7 swing states would be akin to him having won Mega Millions legitimately 6 times in a row. Is that correct?
It's actually worse than that because...
Okay. Mega Millions 6 times in a row is a 1 in 10 to the 50th chance. 538 had Donald Trump winning at a 20%, or had Donald Trump winning with this number of states or more at 20%. How are we getting this big discrepancy where he's saying it's a 0 followed by 48 zeros and a 1%, and then whatchamacallit, 538 is saying 20%. The reason is that whatever math they're doing, it isn't mathing. In fact, if you go back to this slide, you see that little 1 there? That's because originally this part had a whatchamacallit. This part claimed that it was a 1 in 35 billion chance, and they had to redact that because that wasn't a claim that was supported by anything. Someone just said it on their subreddit, and they parroted it without checking if what was actually used to generate that number. No one knows what was used to generate that number. And as they're saying here, it seemed unlikely that a candidate could win all 7 swing states outside the mandatory recount margins. There is no historical data suggesting that a candidate's popular vote total and the number of states they win outside the recount margin is linked. They're making this weird linkage here. Well, these are two conflicting things, but they're not. If you look at the historical data, in 1996, Bill Clinton had no states within 0.5% margin, and he had less than 50% of the popular vote. In 1992, same thing. Bill Clinton had no states within 0.5%, and he had less than 40% of the popular vote. And in 1968, that wasn't Richard Nixon. That was Richard Nixon. Yeah, Richard Nixon had no states within 50% of the popular vote. Sorry, within 0.5% margin, and he had less than 50% of the popular vote. So I don't know why they're saying that's so rare.
Okay,
They don't explain
their
methods for explaining why it's rare. They just say it's rare. So back to this. Is there a mathematical explanation for the clumping that isn't interference? Yes. It's this thing called the central limit theorem. This states that if you have any random variable with a standard deviation of sigma, and you take n samples of it, the standard deviation from that sampling is going to be sigma over square root of n. The big takeaway there is that the more samples you have, the less variation there is in your data. It's going to start to clump as you get more. So this weird clumping that you're seeing, it's not weird, it's expected. And if you go to their source about their Russian tail statistic, you'll actually see that it claims that too, that the good-looking data was clumped and the bad-looking data was scattered. So they're making the opposite claim of their source, and there's a perfectly rational mathematical explanation for this. So the clumping isn't something to worry about. Now on to this. Now this is where things get interesting. This is where they found something that I think is kind of unique. So you can see election day voting follows a bell curve. Early voting does not. They claim that it's skewed, but if you look at this is multimodal, right? There's a standard deviation here, there's a standard distribution here, and there's a standard distribution here. When you combine those together, you get 2 modes, and that indicates that there are 2 different kinds of voters in the early voting set, 2 different populations with different means and different standard deviations. They claimed that there's no way to do that naturally without cheating, and I'm here to make the case that they've overlooked some simple things that perfectly explain it, which is going to show you on the next slide. If you look at early voting sites in Clark County is kind of unique because of how big it is. It has like a very dense metropolitan core, but a very sparse rural outlying area, which makes early voting hard because you can't staff those sites in the outlying areas as easy. So they came up with this pretty good solution to handle that, where there are long-term voting sites in the metropolitan core that are designed to process a big amount of voters for that very dense area. And there are short-term voting sites that are in those outlying areas, and then they're also sometimes in the metropolitan core that have less machines because they move where they are every day or so they have to pack them up onto a truck and move them. But you can see long-term voting sites have 10 to 30 voting machines. Short-term voting sites have 6 to 10. You do the math on that. That means that all else being equal, these long-term voting sites are going to have less votes per machine than the short-term ones. So that gives us an explanation for why there might be for why some tabulators have a lot more votes than other tabulators in early voting. Now, is there an explanation for why these two populations, why there might be different populations would use the polling sites at different frequencies? And yeah, there is. So here's an example. This is a random place in Logan, Nevada. You can see that their closest polling site is in the library in their hometown. It is a 6-mile drive from their house, and this is their nearest short-term early voting place. Their nearest long-term early voting place is not 3 hours. It is 85 minutes away by car. You have to drive 87 miles from Logan, this border town that is in Clark County still, all the way up to Henderson, which is one of the suburbs of Las Vegas, vote at a mall, and then you'd have to drive back. And at some times when I checked this, the route would actually literally take you through Arizona over here. So if you're living in Logan, are you going to vote at the library, which is probably 5 to 10 minutes from your house? Or are you going to vote at the Galleria Mall, which is, 85 minutes from your house? I don't know about you, but driving 85 miles through the desert, that isn't like something I just want to do for an errand. If I can avoid that, I would. So I would probably vote at the library. Like, that's just me. And now, here's what I think is the real smoking gun, saying that this theory is probably what's going on, instead of their theory of a vote-flipping algorithm. So, I looked at each precinct. I saw how many votes during early voting, how many votes were cast at a high-volume tabulator, how many votes were cast at a low-volume tabulator, and these are the three precincts with the highest proportion of votes cast at a low-volume tabulator. You can see on the map they're all right next to each other. Here's 4559, 4031, and 4434. And right in the dead center in them is a long-term early voting place. There's recreational complex right here was a long-term early voting place. So, to recap, there were two different kinds of polling sites in Clark County. Short-term polling places had less tabulators assigned to them, meaning that they would process more votes per person. There were no long-term voting places in the outlying areas of Clark County. They were only found in Henderson, Las Vegas, and North Las Vegas. This would explain why the pattern happened in 2020, as well as why it was not present during Election Day voting, because the short-term, long-term voting places were not in effect on Election Day. It also, just in my opinion, fits their graph better than the vote-flipping algorithm, because this would produce a multimodal distribution, while vote-flipping would produce a skewed distribution. And we don't see a skewed distribution, we see a multimodal one. So why did I make this video? I agree with Election Truth Alliance on some of their stances, notably about paper ballots and improving trust in the elections. I don't quite agree with them on hand counting ballots, just in the United States, because we decided to put every election on Election Day. It's just not feasible for us to do that 100%. But I do think that we shouldn't be voting on machines. And as much as possible, we should be making it easy for people to verify the results of an election. But they seem to view everything as a sign of voter fraud. I didn't put it on that slide earlier, but in that Substack article, they think that our county having more votes for Donald Trump than registered Republicans is a sign of voter fraud. But that's just something that happens. And sometimes, and just in my opinion too, especially on the less mathematical research, they definitely are getting things wrong. Like with that example before, they also are saying that they're misreading the qualifications for when a primary is recounted and trying to apply them to a general election to say that having more votes than Republicans is a problem when it isn't. That happens all over the place. I think that if they keep going down this route of saying everything is election fraud and not being careful, then when they inevitably go to court about this and try and challenge it, they're going to damage their credibility because there's going to be some just easy explanations they missed. And I think that that could destroy them. Like, we just came off of, if you're in the terminally online space like I am, you probably heard about the Carl Jobs lawsuit that was settled in the past 2 weeks, where that man destroyed his reputation because he was pushing to his audience that he had a watertight lawsuit against countersuit against Billy Mitchell, when in reality his argument sucked. He was going to lose that case, and many people felt defrauded when he claimed that he had such a strong case, and when it came to court, he didn't. So I think it's just better to make sure that we have a stronger argument before doing anything with the courts, especially where we're collecting donations from followers. You know, there's a high level of trust you gotta meet if you want to be a reputable non-government organization that's living off of people's donations. You owe it to those people to make sure your data's right and make sure that you're holding yourself to a higher standard. And I've also seen that the speculation around election fraud is doing real damage both to the Democratic Party's reputation and to people who believe in it. I mean, I've seen all around their subreddit, there are posts saying, why isn't Kamala Harris doing anything about the election fraud? Why aren't Nancy Pelosi and AOC speaking up? Well, the reason they're not speaking up is that there isn't evidence for it. It's not strong evidence. Most of their evidence is fairly weak. So yeah, they're not going to speak up about it because that just plays into Donald Trump's hands. Then I've also just seen it, like, it's just kind of sad if you look at, like, the people on their subreddit on the inauguration day. They were having a full-on psychotic meltdown. Like, I saw one person who like, there were people who would say that, like, Kamala Harris was gonna, like, come up and, like, rip the Bible out of Trump's hand and she was gonna swear in instead. I saw one person who was fully convinced that because Trump didn't swear in by noon, that he wasn't the president and that Kamala was the president now. I've seen people that think that if Trump gets impeached, that Kamala Harris is the president, when that's not really how it works due to the weird tie-breaking rules in the Constitution. Like, I've seen people delude themselves a lot, and that's not good for their mental health. Like, they need to take a step back, understand that I know the situation with Donald Trump sucks, but it's what happened. And we can't pretend that it's not what happened, because that's how we got Donald Trump elected to a second term. We never fully reckoned with his first term, and that's how we got him for a second. We never solved the issues that his voters, I guess, wanted to feel like they were solved. So, and then ultimately, I just want ETA to be held to a higher standard. I think that they often present their arguments to people with a very loose grasp on statistics who don't have the means or the knowledge to verify what ETA is saying for themselves. And I think that sometimes that lets them slide with some things. So people aren't going to investigate you. They're not going to fact check you. And when you have that, you know, it's easy to make mistakes. I think that if you want ETA to succeed, you gotta be grilling them on the small things like this. They can't say things like that the Fayette County Vincent Manetta was totally justified in hand-counting the ballots, because that is a ridiculous statement to make. The ACLU and the Democratic Party have both condemned Manetta, but for some reason ETA took his side. You can't say things like Ronald Reagan won 7 swing states unless you're willing to back it up by saying what 7 swing states he won. You can't just find a number like 1 in 35 billion and post it on your website without verifying that that number is a good number. And I think that the people who follow ETA aren't holding them to this standard. And if no one's going to step up and hold them to that standard, then I'm going to be the one to do it. So, I mean, it'd be really interesting if they could find something, but I think that at least in Clark County, the information they are showing doesn't align with election fraud. It aligns with Clark County's unique geography and its unique approach to dealing with that geography.